And then we have one more side. Side AT right here corresponds with what?
OG.
OG. Okay. All right, you need to stop. We got a lot to get through today. All right, let's do this now. This is the reason why I rewrote this triangle and I flipped it. Again, I have a hard time seeing it, but it's doable. We could start with the easy one. I know that angle H and angle what are corresponding? P. They're in the same spot up top here. Yeah? All right, now if I think about angle O, if it's flipped, it's going to be over here, so what does it correspond with? Angle E. Remember, this is flipped. So angle O and angle E are corresponding. And then that leaves angle T. And if it's flipped, it's going to correspond with angle N. Okay, let's talk about the sides. So I could start with side NP. That's this side right here. What does that correspond with? HT. Okay, and then I could do side NE. So that's on the bottom here. It corresponds with what? OT. And then the last one is side PE. That's right here. Even if you didn't flip it, could you kind of see which one it corresponds with? HO. Do you see that? So you're matching up corresponding angles and sides. And since the figures are identical by a slide or reflection, the triangle's corresponding parts are congruent. Okay, so now I'm going to have you do something opposite. I'm going to have you mark all pairs of congruent corresponding parts in the figures. So these two are the same as up here, but we're going to mark them. Now how do we mark an angle as congruent? What do we do?
You do that little thing.
It's like a little curve, right? So I already said up here that A and O are corresponding. So I'm going to show that they're congruent by doing this little curve there. Then I'm going to show that T and G are congruent, but they're not congruent to A. So I got to do two of them.
I got it.
And then C and D, what would I do up here? Because these are different, yes. They're equal to each other, but they're different from the others. So you draw three. All right, now sides. How do we show congruence on sides? A little tick mark, little line, right? So I said that AC and OD are congruent. So I'm going to just do one line there. How about on the bottom here? These two are congruent with each other, so I have to do double, though, because they're different than these two. And then, obviously, I got to do 3 over here. Okay? We showed congruence in those triangles. Same thing here. We wrote up here that H and P were congruent, so I'm going to do my little thing there for H and P. And then we wrote O and E are congruent, so I'm going to follow exactly what I say there, O and E. Put the double lines there. And then we said T and N are congruent, so I'm going to put 3 there. And then I can go to my sides. I said NP, which is this one, is congruent to HT, which is that one. Yeah, Graham. Nope, doesn't matter. Okay, so there's that part. Figures are congruent if and only if all pairs of corresponding angles and all pairs of corresponding sides are congruent. Then we can say the triangles are congruent. And that's going to be important for the proofs. Okay? Since all pairs of corresponding parts in the figures above are congruent, we can make a general congruence statement. Your homework is going to say, make a general congruence statement. So all you do is you write down the fact that triangle CAT is congruent. Be careful. This is where it becomes important. If you're naming this as CAT, then you have to name this in the same order, DOG, with the corresponding parts together. So, angle DOG. Now let me just show you. See, I started here. CAT. Yes? And then I started with the corresponding angle in DOG. Yeah? Okay. Now, there's another way we could write it. Let's say we started with angle TCA. So what would be the congruent way to name this triangle? GDO. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do a little more. So, this says given, they're telling me that this triangle is congruent to this triangle. They are telling me this is a true statement. That tells me that my angles and my sides are all what? Congruent. Okay? So, here's an easy way to do this. If you can't just tell what's equal, the naming is important. Here it says triangle ABC is congruent to triangle XYZ. That means that angle A and angle X are congruent.
Gotcha.
By the naming. Then what other angles? What are my next pair of congruent angles? B and Y. So I'm going to do 2 lines there. And then C and Z, therefore, are congruent by the way it's named. Isn't that cool? Oh, but there's even cooler. Is that a word? I don't know. Look, you can also do the sides. Look, if A, B are next to each other here, that means that AB is congruent to what? Oh, AB is congruent to XY purely based on the naming.
So we don't have to do the...
And then, can I do another side here? BC is congruent to YZ. And then your last one will be congruent to the other one, correct? Isn't that nifty?
That is kind of nice.
Okay, naming. Naming is important.
That's so cheap.
So now it says mark and list all corresponding congruent parts. Well, we've already labeled it all, so just need to write it out. Angle A is congruent to what angle? Look at your picture. Angle X. Angle B is congruent. Look at your picture. 2 thingies to angle Y.
We have to...
You got to write it out. Get used to it. In this chapter, you will be writing. Angle Z is congruent to C is congruent to angle Z. So we did the angles. Now we need to write the corresponding sides, congruent sides. Just look at your picture.
AB.
CB is congruent to YZ. AB is congruent to XY. And the last one is segment AC is congruent to, look at your picture again, don't be confused by it because you already marked it up. So just looking at your picture and writing it down. Okay, the orders of letters in the names of the triangles must show correspondence of parts when you write them down. Are you good on the front page?
Yeah.
Okay.
My nails are pretty.
Aren't my nails pretty? I got those done this weekend too. Okay. Turn it over. We have more. Ready? Recall that congruent segments have the same measure. And congruent angles have the same measure. Okay? In this diagram right here, they're telling me that PQR is congruent to KMN. When they tell me that, I know that all the angles and all the corresponding sides are what? Yes. So, I'm going to pick this apart. Okay, so first of all, P is first and K is first. That tells me that P and K are congruent. So how big is P?
50.
50. So I can just fill that in. And then Q and M are in the same spot, so that tells me that angle Q and angle M are congruent. So M is 100. Oh, but wait, they didn't say anything about R and M. What do I do? Oh, look how much you learned. I know these add up to 180. So I got to do 180 minus 100 minus 50 equals 30. So this is 30 and this is 30. Cool, huh?
Yeah.
Pardon me? Do you have to do that? What do you mean? Oh, no, you could just put 30. Yeah. All right, so now I know that PQ and side KM are corresponding just by the way it's named. PQ and KM. So that means how long is PQ? 8. And then QR and MN. QR and MN. So how big is MN? 15, right on.
The PR is 18.
And therefore, the last one is 18. Yes? Sweet. Okay. Now, this is where it gets a little weird, but it's still not hard at all. Let's just take a look at what we have here. Use the triangles below, identify all corresponding congruent parts. Let's start with easy. We see these are congruent, right?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with the angles. Angle A is congruent to angle W. Okay, now I got to talk about these two. I cannot call them angle C. Why not? Why can't I call them angle C? Because they're two different angles. Even though they're congruent, I have to name them differently. This is sometimes you have to name angles with 3 letters. So I say ACP. ACP is talking about that right there. Yeah? Yes, Jacob. No. Sorry. ACP is congruent. So that's this angle right here is congruent to this angle. So I'm going to say WCP. So the letter C is in the middle for both of these because we're talking about this location right here. Yeah? Okay, now on the bottom, let's do this. So I would say angle APC is congruent to angle WPC. Slightly different, because see, P is in the middle, so it's talking about this location down here. Now, okay, we did the angles, let's do the sides. Ready? All right, this is easy. So here we can see that AC, it's already marked for us, is congruent to CW. I can also see that segment AP is congruent to segment PW. What about the third side?
What about it?
Right here. How would we write that, Brad?
CWP, triangle CWP, triangle CWP.
Almost. We have to somehow state that this is equal to itself. We have to state that that third side is congruent, and this is what you're a step ahead of us. So here I would say segment CP is congruent to segment CP. You have to state it. So important that you state everything when you're writing a proof, and I know that because you learned this in first chapter. It's the reflexive property. Something is equal to itself, like looking in the mirror, reflection. You look in the mirror, you're equal to yourself, right? Reflection, reflexive. All right, 2 figures, I know this is small, but 2 figures are congruent if all their corresponding parts are congruent. So now we can say what Brad said. Since all the angles are congruent, all the sides are congruent, I can write a congruent statement, which is what? Congruent statement is saying that this triangle is congruent to this triangle. So I'm going to start by saying CWP is congruent to triangle CAP. Please don't even consider opening your book yet. Okay. Can I name it a different way? Sure, give me another way I could name it. PWC is congruent to what? You guys got it. Okay. So, a couple more things and then I'm done. Is there enough evidence to prove that the pairs of triangles below are congruent? So in this figure, here's those parallel lines that I was talking about. It says that this line is parallel to this line. Okay? So, use past reasoning to determine whether the triangles are congruent. Explain your conclusions. Well, let's look at the sides first. Look, did they already tell us that all the corresponding sides are congruent? Yes, the sides are good. So I need to, all sides are congruent. Well, that's not what it, all corresponding sides are congruent, I should say, to be specific. I'm going to abbreviate. All corresponding sides are congruent. That was given to me. Well, let's talk about the angles. We have to prove the angles are congruent. Do you see an obvious one? Are these angles congruent?
Yeah.
How do you know that? Because they're vertical. Remember vertical angles? Ah, so I got to name it with the 3 letters because I can't just name it with 1 letter. So I'm going to say angle LJK is congruent to angle HJK. State your reason. Vinny told us the reason. It's because of the vertical angle theorem. I'll abbreviate. Vertical angle theorem. That's how I know that those are congruent. Okay, so if I look at this as the transversal through these parallel lines, what do I know about this angle and this angle? How come? Not exterior. They're alternate interior angles, right? Okay, so I can say now, I can name it just by L. Angle L is congruent to angle G because they're alternate interior angle theorem. I'm going to abbreviate. Got it? It's kind of fun. It's like a puzzle, isn't it? Come on.
Yeah.
Okay, now if I look at this as the transversal, what can I say about this angle and this angle? They are also alternate interior angles. So I'm going to say angle K is congruent to angle IH because of the alternate interior angle theorem. Have I shown that all the corresponding parts are congruent? Therefore, I can make a congruent statement, which would be what? Except I want to now make that final statement, which is what? What am I trying to prove? That's what I'm trying to prove. I'm trying to prove that triangle LJK is congruent to, if I started over here, I got to start over here, GJ, sorry, H. This one's even more fun. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay, use the information in the diagram and past reasoning to determine whether the triangles are congruent.
They are.
Now let's see what we got here. We have this angle congruent to each other. Yes? These are congruent to each other. No, I should have just done 2 there. Sorry. Can I say that these are congruent to each other?
Yeah.
How many do they add up to?
Well, that's to add up to 180.
180, right? So if I do 180 minus 37 minus 90, I'm going to get 53. And these is the same. That's 53. So those are going to be congruent to each other. All right, my 3 angles are congruent. I have enough reasoning for that. This side is congruent, right? Because of the which property? You're looking in the mirror. It's the reflexive property. If I look at this as one big triangle, these angles are the same, so this must be a what kind of triangle? The big one together.
Equilateral.